Want to know more about rock, jazz, rhythm, and blues? You got to start from the bottom up. The Bass Guitar Channel radio show with David C. Gross and Tom Semioli. Two bass road warriors tell tales, interview the greats, and spin more great music than you can shake a Chapman stick at. The Bass Guitar Channel radio show with your hosts, David C. Gross and Tom Semioli, every Monday at 8 on Cygnus Radio.
Hi, this is David Gross for the Bass Guitar Channel radio show on CygnusRadio.com. We have a great show for you tonight. Along with my co-host, head honcho for KnowYourBassPlayer.com, Tom Semioli, we have George Porter Jr. George Porter Jr. was the bassist, founding member of the Meters, one of the funkiest groups on the planet. He's also played with everyone from Robert Palmer to Patti LaBelle to Albert King, Robbie Roberts, and tons of folks. So let's get into it. Hi, Tom. Hi, George.
What's up, guys?
Hey, looking good, George. How you doing?
Oh, it's still early.
So, George, I have to tell you a quick story. So when I was about 13, I went to Manny's looking at instruments to buy. Then I started walking towards 42nd Street, and there was this little record store. They always had great stuff. I got the Meters on Josie Records for 69 cents. I went home and paid the shit out of that record.
Yes, indeed.
You get royalties from that, George, from his 69 cents.
No, I kind of think that record label kept all the money.
Yeah, as most did.
What a surprise. So, George, what have you been doing during this lockdown? Anything musical?
Well, actually, during the lockdown, myself and the band Running Partners.
Yeah.
I kind of put most of the blame on my keyboard, Michael Limler. He is such a techno person. He has his pulse, his finger on the pulse of reading manuals and making stuff work. But we bought this when we both used, all of us actually, we used Pro Tools. About 6-7 years ago, we invested into this cloud. When we upgraded to Pro Tools 10, I believe, or something like that, right. The cloud thing came available to us, but we never used it. We never used it because it was so easy for everybody to come over to my house and we just work here in the studio. So COVID thing come up, called Mike. I said, man, you think this might be a good time to find out what this cloud thing does? Because I think it's a great time for us to try and work on a record, And he said, I agreed. Let me do some homework and I'll call you tomorrow. So basically he called me the next day and he told me, he showed me how to upload the songs that was there already, that was prepared with the old guitar player and Brent Anderson, who left the band. And we know that's what made me start my trio band, because Brent left the band. And I just said, man, I'm just going to play as a trio with Mike and Terrence and myself. And then we, the booking agency called me up and said, man, people are asking for Running Partners dates. He said, you guys need to put together a band. So at that point, we looked into a young man named Chris Atkins and invited him, to come in. And he's been wonderful energy. And he's young. He does homework, which is like in our day and age. Young musicians who do homework, that's like remarkable. And he came ready, man. He came ready. He learned songs that we had forgotten. He pretty much learned the whole Running Partners catalog and came ready to play it. It was killing. So I said, well, let's take and replace Brent's guitar parts with Chris. And while we were doing that, I started writing some new songs. So we used like maybe 5 to 6 songs from the original session that Chris just overdubbed guitar on. And I was in the process of listening to songs. I started writing new stuff, and so we wrote 6 more new pieces of material. So all total, we wrote 14 songs, but we put 12 together and finished 12 of them. So, I have a record that's, basically, I think they dropped the second single last week. The first one was dropped on my birthday, December 26th, was called Crying for Hope. And then the newest one that they just dropped was Get Back Up, which is an instrumental. The first one was a vocal song, and the second was an instrumental.
Yeah, and I think actually wasn't your last full record Can't Beat the Funk, right?
The last full record was, yes, Can't Beat the Funk. It was a 12 or 14 songs, meter recordings that was never released by the Meters.
Right. Yes. Terrific.
Well, not never released. I'm sorry. It was never performed live.
Right. Right.
We recorded these songs, but we never played them as a band, Yeah. And people have been, on my gigs, people be walking up to me asking me to play songs, and I say, well, man, I don't know about that one. We haven't touched on that. So, like in a Lamb, I had maybe a month off or something like that. And I call the guys up and say, man, why don't we cut these songs, and I gave them 24 meter tracks that the band never played. And, the band came back to me and said, well, let's do these 12, or just do these 14. And we recorded 14 tracks. We gave away 2 on my website. Those 2 are still up there for grabs. Okay. And then, the other 12 went to a CD.
Well, while we're on the topic of recording and records, you come, and David and I always address this topic. We tend to do it at the end of the show, but since you brought up Pro Tools, such a different world it is from recording analog to Pro Tools. Now, obviously, you came of age. Your greatest work was in the analog era when that red light went on and you guys had to deliver. Do you think how do you think Pro Tools and digital recording has affected the art form of recording and playing bass?
Well, I think what the digital age has done, and I'm probably guilty of it, is not as allowed us not to be perfect from start. Right. It allows us to play multiple ideas and figure out which one really works. For me, especially the songs that I'm singing, I tend to write these songs with just the bass, and write a bass line and something like that, and then that'll be the bed for the song. Right. But then when I get the lyrics back from my lyricist and I start trying to sing the stuff and I sing it, then I realize that, man, wait a minute, I can't play that bass line and sing this melody, So then one of them has to change, which in my world, I think it's easier for me to change a bass line, make a bass line a little simpler. As I've grown, I think I may have gotten a little busier again with bass lines. And so the vocal melodies, bass line is getting in the way. So I need to simplify my bass line so I can do them both. It's been big, but that's what the digital world is allowed to. Back in the analog days, we'd have been in the studio and somebody had been real upset with me because I was, taking too many takes, take 33.
But also you have to, I guess in your situation now, we are in the 21st century and I see all the equipment behind you. The nice thing is that you can make a great record in your living room now. So, there is a balance, there is a payoff in that sense. You don't have to spend the money on a studio because folks don't buy records anymore. It's all streaming now.
It's all streaming. I'm thinking about buying my daughter's house next door and move the studio to the first floor. Right now, the first floor is on the studio is on the 3rd floor. So that means I got to climb 3 flights of stairs to get to it.
Cheaper to get an elevator put in.
Oh no! Then I have to buy the house by my neighbor because the elevator would have to fit on her side of the building. So yeah, I'm gonna have to buy somebody's house. But yeah, I'm liking the digital age better than I because of like I said, it gives me the opportunity to play around with different ideas. There's one song that's on a new coming record. We called it Spanish Moss, and it was the whole song was. I wrote the whole piece of music was written probably like the first. I think it's probably like first 2.5 minutes of the song was all a bass line, almost like a bass solo for the most part. And once I uploaded it to the cloud, contacted Chris, the guitarist first, and I told him, I said, Chris, you think you can the lines that I'm playing in section A and the B section, you think that you can play those in double stops? And he said, oh yeah, man, give me a few, And he popped out and jumped back at me about an hour later or something and said, check this out and see if you like it. And he did, but what he did do is that he played single notes and then he doubled, he played the harmony thing. Yeah. And so I told him, I said, no, Chris, I recognize that you're playing 2 parts. I want to hear you do that together because there's a certain, like a harmonic that you hear.
The resonance, the overtones.
Yeah. He said, okay, I won't cheat. He went back and he did it. And it did. And then when he came back the next time, he told me, say, man, I see what you're saying, how different that sound, because you played both of those notes at the same time. I wanted to take my part away and just have Chris's part be the lead. And I was going to put a bass line down, but it was going to be much simpler. Boom, 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 boom. That was going to be my bass line for the song. When Mike heard it, and him and Chris got their heads together, and they decided that I should leave my bass line, the original bass line, in with Chris. And so, like, the two of us are playing this part. And Michael Limler, the keyboard, is going to now play a synth bass. to play the synth bass. Well, I mean, on the recording, it's me playing bass, but on the live gig, when we play it live, Mike is going to play the bass line in his left hand.
Okay, well, be careful, David. If you do sessions for George, no cheating.
Well, that's it. Well, that's why I play 6-string bass, so I can do it all.
You're right.
But George, one of the things I wanted to ask you, and this is as good a time as any, is that you really have embraced 21st century technology. I started looking at, you use pedals, using envelope filter, an octave bass, and chorus. When did you start using that, and what got you involved in hearing that?
Well, I believe that it was probably still in the 19th century when I started using pedals. I used a wah-wah pedal in late 60s, late 60, 68, 69, maybe, the album Chicken Strut.
That was a new device back then, yeah.
Back then, yeah, I used the wah-wah pedal on my bass. I used it on. I didn't play to get the wave on. I just used it for a tone.
Gotcha.
And Leo introduced I think it was called a MXR pedal, the little orange.
Yep.
Phase shift, I believe they were called.
Phase 90.
Phase 90s, okay. Well, that Phase 90s was in more in the 70s, I believe. This thing was a little scroll box about that big. It was just called maybe a phaser or something like that. But it was orange and it had one pedal, one button on it. And I think there's 2 knobs on it. I used to have one of those around the house. I kind of tried keeping all those old pedals. I started using that stuff way back then. And when we recorded, I want to say in the not the Cabbage Alley album. In the Cabbage Alley album, I used a chorus pedal. Not a chorus pedal, but that phase shifter thing. By the time we got to New Directions, I had went back. Whoa, you know what it was? You remember the Mutrons?
I was just going to ask you about that.
I had a Mutron. I had the Mutron 2. When I got sick of the wah-wah pedal, because I wasn't using the wah-wah as a wah-wah. I was using it just for a tone. Gotcha. And I found somebody, I don't remember who, some bass player gave me the Octava pedal. So I've been Mr. Maestro. I think it was made by Maestro, I believe.
Okay.
And I went looking up the Maestro thing and saw this envelope filter. And I said, oh, maybe that's what I'm looking for. And I went, got me one of them and hooked that sucker up. And man, I was in heaven. Name Up in Lights is on the New Directions record is that envelope filter. By the time when we got into multi-track and when I was cutting 2 bass lines, I never had any input on what made it to the record. I would put my parts down, right, and then I would go off to get high. And somebody else, actually mixed in what they wanted to hear out of the bass. So a lot of times my effects channel didn't get used. It's just a clean bass.
Well, Mutron went out of business. Now they're back in business. They got the Mutron 3, and Neil Jason was playing that funk machine back in, I guess it was the 70s. We were all using that in the studio. He has now reconstituted. It's a company called Sea Moon, and it's the exact replica of the original funk machine.
Oh, no kidding.
Yeah. They had a great sound, too.
Yeah. I never got a funk machine. I used that Mutron all the way up until I had gotten these new custom double 15 boxes, the tuck and roll boxes. And I had gotten with the custom 200 head, and I had a head on each cabinet. So when I bought the cabinet, it was like a head of the 200 head with 2 bottoms, with 4 15s. I wanted to have a head on each cabinet. So I bought a second head. I had this Neutron set up to go through these cabinets at a sound check. I hit that Neutron and took out all 4 speakers. All 4 speakers died right there. Bloop. No. I ended up playing the gig to a guitar.
Good God. Without a Neutron.
Without a Neutron, yeah. That was the last time I used that Neutron because
I can't understand why. Wow.
That was it.
Yeah. It's interesting. We talk about tremendous body of work and all the geographic areas where we associate music. Now, you had the sound of Muscle Shoals. You had Motown. You had the sound of Philadelphia. You had the Wrecking Crew in L.A. And, of course, you had the New York contingency. I don't know if we had a name. And then, of course, there's the sound of Oakland with Tower of Power. What is it that gives New Orleans its unique sound? Is it part of the heritage? Is it the French, Spanish, Filipino, Native American heritage? What is unique to New Orleans where you have that sound, where you can recognize something from New Orleans in one note, one phrase?
I tried to think about what made that stuff happen that way. I think it had a lot to do with very few times when you're a session player actually have the call of what your instrument's really going to sound like in this project, because you play your part, they give you your check, and you go away. And so that record comes out. So it's in the hands of the producers and that back in there, those producers weren't as smart as they, as everybody thought producers was. Producers depended mostly directly on the engineer. The engineer was the guy. He was the solid, making things sonically correct. I think that what it was back then, New Orleans had a great, Cosmo Matassa might have had a lot of influence on the sound of New Orleans records, what they should sound like. And all the engineers that came behind him were kind of encouraged to listen at this. That's what I want this music to sound like. No matter how way in the front you are, listen to this. When the Meters moved from New Orleans to Atlanta to do the Strutting record and the Look a Pie Pie record and the Strutting record, we brought Skip Godwin to Atlanta with us. He was using these high-tech multi-track desk, I can't remember the name of the desk, but it was like one of those desks. When I listened to those records versus when I listened to the Meters record, that very first album, you can sonically almost hear the same thing. So the only thing mean that the engineer, you know what I'm saying? He mixed it like this. He used the same compression that was available to him to get the sounds that, people always ask me about how I captured that low end thing, but I would love to take the credit for that, but I think that was all the engineer, because when I'm cutting a track, my bottom end is nice and fat, but that mid highs is a part of what I hear. I want to hear, because I guess it's the guitar player in me want to hear that mid top part. I want to hear those notes. I don't just want that D and G string to disappear in low end world, and I want some clarity. Those are original recordings. That D and G string kind of was like inside that. It would get lost especially if Art left hand got in the way, and we just accidentally on the same note at the same time. My bass would disappear because Art's left hand. The B3 would just boom, just wipe it out.
Well, you started off as a classical guitar player. That's one of the two things you and I have in common. And actually, the classical guitar, the actual technique is very similar to the electric bass. Classical guitar is held like an electric bass with the hand positioning. So, was that an easy transition for you to make from the classical guitar to the electric bass?
It was very easy. My classical training, although it was very limited, it was for 2 years. It wasn't about the classical music. It was more about the ability to perform, the use of 9 of the 10 fingers. And it was real easy for me to move guitar to bass, real easy.
And then, of course, obviously studying classical, you learn to read at least. And I know in classical, there's no E7 vamps or 12-bar blues.
Right.
You got to read what's on the page. Yeah.
Right. And, that was, and that's the thing today I miss more than anything is my abilities to read, to take and pull up a piece of music that I've never seen before and read it. When we started working with Alan, he kind of like stifled the idea of reading. We were in the studio lots and lots and lots, but, I wasn't reading well in the studio. He was giving me parts to play and I would play those parts, and when there were difficult parts and parts that I had to remember, a lot of parts, I would always tell him, I said, man, it'd be much easier if I could read this stuff, and he'd say, if I wanted somebody to read this music, I'd have kept Walter Payton, who's the best reading bass player in the city. It wasn't about my abilities to read. It was the feel that I had in a relationship to Zigaboo on drums.
Right.
That's what he was wanting. That's what he wanted in the music. He wanted that camaraderie between Zig and myself. Although I was playing, most of the times, my bass lines are in his left hands on almost all that stuff that we did with Lee Dorsey and Patti LaBelle and some of that stuff. Except for the Robert Palmer stuff. The Robert Palmer record was probably all my bass mind.
Yeah, well, you look at Alan's work. I mean, like you mentioned, Patti LaBelle, Robert Palmer, of course, Boz Scaggs and Lowell George and all that. Those are really feel records, although they're very concise. My educated guess was like, oh, these guys are reading charts, but yet again, it still has that loose feel that the meters have.
Yeah, I don't know if Alan ever got, well, I think, to get me to take that back, because I think I'm lying, because I believe that he did eventually go back to putting music in front of people.
Okay.
Because by the time guys like Chris Severin and those guys got into the studio with Alan, he was at that age now that, it's much easier for me to write this out and read it, because those guys were excellent readers, so if a fly flew on the paper, it got read.
Yeah. Well, George, I had another question. That first Meters record, To a Boy Growing Up on 68th and Broadway in New York City, really changed my mind on a lot of things. And we had, you remember Stuff, of course, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I love that band. Yeah.
Gordon Edwards.
I think my appreciation for Stuff, which is huge, would not have come about without listening to that first Meters record, because even though they're different, they're the same. Do you know what I'm trying to say?
Yeah. Our very first trip to LA, can't remember what year that was. It might have been year that very first
75?
Stuff album come out. 75
or 75.
74, yeah. We played a club out there. It was off the beaten path, and Stuff opened for us. And it was, it was like their record release party.
Okay.
And they played that album in its entirety, in their set before we came on. And I went back, I sit there and listen to the whole record, and I went back to the band and said, what the fuck we gonna do now? These guys just played all the music on the planet.
Listen, there were times I would listen to Richard T. playing piano, and I'd say, I'm not playing bass anymore. That was a serious band. I loved that band. Wow. And that night I bought a cassette, because they had cassettes of it. They didn't have the labels made yet. It was just a cassette. And I remember buying the cassette, and I recently looked for it. I can't find it. So, but I got about 4,000 cassettes, so I'm still working my way to it. I'll find it again. But I love that record, man.
I wonder if Gordon Edwards is a disciple of George Porter, because I hear a lot of similarity. I mean, your style of bass playing, to my ears, it's a very staccato style. It's a style that leaves a lot of space. I think of like Doug Dunn, who, those of you guys are very different. When you look at a Doug Dunn chart, you see a lot of white space on the page, because Duck would love to groove with quarter notes, whole notes, eighth notes. And I see that a lot in your playing, where you do leave a lot of space. And the bass tone, which was your P bass, I guess, just had that beautiful growl and resonance.
Yeah, everything after Cabbage Alley was that P bass. The bass that was on the Cabbage Alley record, Strutting record, on most of the Liquor Pie Pie record. So I'll tell you, This old animal.
Oh, that's gorgeous.
Man,
Wow.
I love this bass. Right now, the electronics may need to be, but I don't know who to send it to. I just don't trust it out of my hands, to give it to anyone. I mean, guys want to do fret jobs and stuff like that. That bass don't need a fret job. The neck is straight as hell. It's like a beautiful instrument. That bass went on everywhere from, I think the second album was Look a Pie Pie. Third album was Struttin'. And then the first record that was considered a vocal record, the Cabbage Alley record. And that bass did Cabbage Alley record as well.
And of course, nowadays you're using a Lakeland split coil like a P bass, yes? I'm
using a D Lakeland. That's my favorite animal right now. It's Dan's new line that he's creating. I have been doing Lakeland since I did that government mule tour. The young bass player named Greg Orzab was a Lakeland endorser. I had a bass out there on the road with me. I had my P bass. Then I was breaking strings on that thing like crazy. And my backup bass was a Warmit neck and a Warmit body, no name. And Greg called Dan up and told him, said, man, George Porter's out here on this tour, man, with a bass that don't have a name on it, man. That's like crazy, man. We got to do something about that. So Dan came to the show that we did in Chicago and bought a whole list, a whole bunch, about 5 or 6 basses out. And he pulled out what is his name? I always say it, but it was I can't even think of his name. But it was a P bass. It was made in China. Okay. And it looked identical to what my P bass looked like when it was brand new, except that it had the fretless, because my P bass had a fretless neck on it before I put that there. Oh, my P bass is a Frankenstein. Yeah. It had that fretless neck on it. So, I took that neck off because I went on tour with the Funky Meters, not the Funky Meters, but the Meters went out, and we were out for like 6 weeks or something like that with that fretless bass, and all I was and both Art and Zig, man, said, Art said he was going to kill me. Zig just looked at me like, really, he just looked at me, man, what are you doing, man? And I was just sliding up and down that neck.
Sure, there's no speed bumps there. Yeah.
So when I got home off that trip, I went. A friend of mine had a music store, and I bought that neck from a guy who wife retired him from the business, and he sold that bass, the neck off the body. So
his
that
wife fired him.
Oh yeah, she said, I'm gonna cut one or the other, either you or the bass.
Well, that's like that story. There's a cartoon that goes, there's a priest with a wife. Obviously the bass player has died. And then someone's in the background going, God, I hope she doesn't sell them for what he told her he paid for them.
Yeah, I was looking at last night. I had did my little stream last night, and I played a few songs on the telly. There was a guy on the stream that Dave Parado was his name, and he said he's a guitar player, songwriter, and he said, man, that bass, I love that bass, And he was in the store when the Fender rep was in the rock and roll music store, and I took the bass in to have it stripped down to this natural wood, because I had saw a bass that was stripped down to natural wood, no pick guard on it. It was beautiful. I thought it was beautiful. And I just said, man, I bet you this bass would look great stripped down. That's what I wanted to go do with it. And then the guy walked over to me and he said, oh my God, man, don't do that. I'll buy it from you. And I said, what you mean? He said, I was working on the line when that bass was built.
Oh my gosh.
And he said, man, man, don't do that to the bass, man. At that point, I just put it back in the case and took it home. Yeah. He said that this bass was one of the first 100 Telecasters built. Now, last night after that gym, I sit up almost for 2 hours, 3 hours, looking online, trying to find out when these basses was really built, the Telecaster, because they pulled out, they showed all these precisions, and their precision bass looked exactly like that tele bass,
Yes,
but,
the early ones, yeah.
But they never said, I never found any clip or anything about the tele bass. They always just talked about the P bass and how the P bass changed the whole structure of the electric bass thing,
Sure. Yeah.
And I'm very interested. If you guys know anything about the tele
we could probably find that out in Geddy Lee's book, but I would imagine, like what Fender did with the jazz bass, they probably tried to appeal to guitar players, right? Because they wanted guitar players to double, and guitar players were familiar with the Telecaster guitar, and essentially the bass has that neck. It's a Telecaster guitar neck, really.
Yeah, but I love that. I love that instrument. It's great.
What, the jazz bass was 61, was it?
The jazz bass was 60, and it was the Fender Deluxe. It came out with the stack knob, and I think the Fender jazz bass as we know it now is a 62 it started. And then, of course, the P bass, as we know it now, started in 57. And now, George, you started playing bass, 1965, 64?
I started playing bass in 65, yeah.
Yeah, 65. Now, at that time, the electric bass was a relatively new instrument. It looked like a guitar. Nobody knows what it did. How did you explain that to civilians? What does that instrument do?
That's a good question. I never thought about that answer. I was prepared to tell you that the bass that I played on at that time was a Gibson. Remember, Gibson had that bass that looked sort of like a violin. They had the EBO, right?
Yeah.
That's what it was. The guy who I used to kind of hang out with, Herbert Wing, he had that bass, and both the bass player in his band and myself would use that bass, whenever for whenever things, and so Herbert was one of those kind of band leaders that had all the equipment. He owned all the equipment. He owned the drums, he owned the piano, he owned the bass, the amps, and he had two of those Fender Bassman amps that he plugged. It was two singers. And he plugged the guitar and one amp with a vocal mic, and the bass and the other amp with a second vocal mic, and that was the setup, And the keyboard player had so it must have been a third amp there, because I know. On the nights when there wasn't a second singer, the keyboard player would plug into that second bassman amp. That's what it was. That was what I learned how to play on. By the time I got to my first bass that I owned, it was a jazz bass that a friend of mine, at the time, I was kind of angry with him because I thought about it. He wasn't quite a friend. He pawned this bass to me, a jazz bass. It had three strings on it, and it was painted red. I mean, it was painted blood red, and it was for $50. He pawned it to me for $50 with I'm thinking that in the early 60s, $50 was a lot of money for a young man.
Sure, yeah.
And come to find out that was my very first bass guitar that I owned was mine. Mm-hmm. It was mine. Now I paid $50 for it. We played on it for a couple of years, not knowing that could have just went to Worldlines Music and bought that one of the heads string bolts was missing. So, and that just had a big hole up there on the G string, and I didn't know that you can go and buy that tuning peg. I didn't know that. That's the way it went. And I played on that bass on three strings for a few years. I mean, Art Neville told me one time. Art used to tell the story all the time. He said, "Man, I remember when Porter only had three strings on his bass. That's when it all went to shit when he bought that other string."
Well, there you go, David. We have to come up with a George Porter signature three-string bass. Why not?
Absolutely.
Who needs the G string anyway? It only gets in the way. Going back 1965, the instrument was new, and David and I, David, will get into how we sort of break up the electric bass from the pre-Jocko years and the post-Jocko years. Now, obviously, you're in the pre-Jocko years. Who were some of the players you were listening to? Who were some of the guys that, kind of inspired you?
Well, to me, I listened to local musicians. It was, I was very much into local players. The guy who, I made indirectly or directly my, bass mentor, his name was Benjamin Francis. He thought that the bass player that was on all those Earl King records was the man. He thought that was that guy name was George French. So I tell people all the time is that, I'm a student of George French by proxy, because the guy who taught me thought George French there was no other bass players on the planet. George French was the man. Question. I got a question for you guys. Back in 64, 65, wasn't there the MPEG bass?
Oh, sure, the scroll bass.
Yes.
Yes. You see, I remember playing on that, on one of those kind, and it was sort of like when it had a stick you could stick in the bottom on it and play it like this too.
Right, the baby bass. But the problem with the Ampegs is the necks were terrible. Not only were they giant, fat, you could use them for a baseball bat, but those basses never stayed in tune, which was great for Latin music because the horn players never stayed in tune.
I remember playing. So that was, to my knowledge, the two basses that my upbringing in my early years would have been that EBO and that MPEG bass. Basically, the MPEG, because I knew about the MPEG before I got to own that jazz bass.
Yeah, for I guess for us in New York, it was either the Beatle bass or the P bass.
Oh yeah.
My God, I was like 11 years old at the time. You watch it on Ed Sullivan, you go, Mom, I want one of those.
One of those, yeah.
It's weird because I'm left-handed, but I play bass right-handed because that was the only one that they had for me. So
yeah. So I remember when we went into we moved first of all, when we left the Nightcap and moved on to Bourbon Street, that had to be like 65 or 60, late 65, early 66. Art, I remember him telling me straight up, right on, and said, "Man, you're gonna have to get a better bass," because he just didn't like that big red bass anyway. Now I had full strings on it, but he just had that brain thought about as a 3-string bass. And you got to get a bass that does things better than that bass, And I got my mom to, we went to Worldline's music store and we bought bass. It was called a Melody Plus. And it was shaped like one of those violin basses. And I'm thinking I'm probably saying the word wrong, but I'm thinking it was Melody Plus. And I played when we recorded Sophisticated Cissy and Cissy Strut and those first 4 songs. Here Come the Meter Man and Seahorn's Farm was recorded on that bass, that bass. And so, so naturally, when you're listening to Sophisticated Cissy, the G string, when I hit that G, boom, 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 it was out of tune. Because that bass had a big problem with keeping the tuning on the E string. The E string would just move,
Yeah.
So,
there were so many knockoffs of that violin-shaped bass. Every time coming out with one, and they were short scale. And for me, you need some length to.
Yeah. Well, that Melody Plus was a long scale bass. I remember that having a long scale. I liked it. I thought it had, because it had that hollow body sound, but electric hollow body bass, was good. So I remember I remember Art saying that, man. Leo told me that's actually said, man, that bass that's out of tune all the time, man. You need to do something about that, And it had those tuning peg things with the back on it was like enclosed. You couldn't get to them. So you change the whole thing and throw the whole thing away, or because you can't repair it or something like that. And so
you could have told him that I'll get back to the fretless bass if you don't like the tuning on this one.
So I remember setting this bass like on the edge of a bar stool, right at the edge of the bar stool. It was that night I had to play a gig, and I said we was at the Ivanhoe on Bourbon Street, and I set the thing right there, knowing that it was going to fall sooner or later. So I just waited for it to just slide off the thing. It hit the floor. When it hit the floor, the back just opened up, and I called my mom and told my mom, I said, "Mom, my bass just split open. I need a bass." And so she called Worldlines and told Worldlines, she had an account over at Worldlines. She just called Worldlines and told them that my son's coming over to grab a bass, So I went and bought the hollow body Gibson bass that, the one that looked like no, not the EBO. Looked like I guess it was the
SG?
It looked like the SG. It looks like the
EB3?
EB3 maybe? Or EB1.
Is that an EB3?
Yeah, I think it was, yeah.
I could never figure that out. See, because I saw that one first, but then later I bought what I thought was the EB2. That's the one that had the 2 pickups on it.
Okay.
The little flat body red one. So I remember buying that later on in time. But when I saw that Telecaster in Atlanta, Georgia, I said, oh.
That's it.
That's the bass, man. I got to have this bass, you know.
And of course, the Fender records. I mean, Fenders are made for studio recording. At least in those days, they were the P bass, the J bass, the Telecaster bass. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know why Gibson didn't get the rap. You know, I thought those were fat sounding instruments. You know, they had balls. They had balls that I didn't think the Fenders ever had. You know.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
But then when CBS bought Precision or bought into Fender, what year was that?
65.
65.
Yep.
Wow, was that neat? Okay, so I got a CB that my fretless Precision bass was a CBS.
Okay.
And I think I bought that in 71.
So did you buy it as a fretless to begin with?
Yes, it was. It was fretless when I bought it.
Rosewood or maple?
It was maple.
But I love those early P-bass fretlesses. They were good instruments.
I just never learned how to play it. It took me 30 years to learn how to play that instrument. And I mean, even Dave, I mean, 50 years later, you know, I really don't, you know, I took that neck about 10 years ago and I bought a Walmart body, but I bought a jazz body.
Okay.
And I put that Precision neck on that jazz body. And the guy take even though he was blonde and I had him, they painted it black and they sanded it down like 10 times. They painted it, sanded, painted it, sanded, painted it, sanded until, man, it's like, you can see like crystal sparkles like coming out of that wood.
Oh, wow.
Beautiful instrument, you know, and with that blonde neck on it, and
use it more often.
That's a jazz you got behind you. That's a Precision there, huh?
This is my George Porter bass. See, it's got a blonde neck. See this? All right, now David, look, it's got 4 strings on it. See that?
I can't count to 4.
And look, and these are called David. These are called frets.
Frets.
Okay. And see you see the scars on this? That's the funk. That's where the funk comes from. But
yes, it is.
But speaking of funk, you know, we talk. You look at. We mentioned Muscle Shoals, the great rhythm section. You talk about the Wrecking Crew with Carol Kay and Hal Blaine. You talk about some of the great jazz rhythm sections. Tony Williams, Ron Carter. You and Zig. What can you put into words? The work that you've done. What makes your work special? What is the synergy between you two guys?
I think I think it was a role that I decided to play with that band and the one thing that I learned from Alan Toussaint was that it's not what you play, it's what you don't play that's going to make this groove happen. And with that in mind, mostly more than with the Meters recordings, you know, that first record, it was a busy porter, and you can hear as it graduated. By the time we got to the Strutting record, which was the third one, my bass lines had gotten simpler and with more space. My thoughts was that the closer I played to Zig's bass drum, far away as I can get from his backbeat, then that's the zone that I want to be in. So that was a concentrated effort on my part to just play with Zig rather than the other way around. You know, I kind of like let him be the force of nature. And
of course, one of the big records, one of the crossover records, at least first time I was introduced to New Orleans on AM radio was the record you made with Dr. John, Right Place, Wrong Time.
Yeah, not my favorite, but I mean, but it opened a lot of ears. But you know, I'll say it every day. I said it last night. You know, Desert Tivoli Bonnaroo was a much better record.
Yeah, that's a fabulous record. Yeah.
This is David Gross for the Bass Guitar Channel radio show on CygnusRadio.com.
But Right Place broke the doors up. I mean, you know, for a white kid growing up in suburban America, I had never heard music like that.
You know, it was good. That was a good record, and you know, it was good for Mac. It did well for us as a rhythm section. People started looking there and say, "Well, they called Alan to produce their records." provided that the meters could be the session players. That worked for most of the sessions that Alan was doing back.
Did you ever have any idea that would be such a big hit?
No, I didn't. I never looked at any of the music that we did as being big hits. You know what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. It was like I didn't go into the heart wide open, ready for to be punctured by something that's not making it well. But then again, because of the fact that I was, probably very inebriated and during that period of time, that, it didn't care. It didn't matter to me whether it was a big record or not. It was just, I was doing my job, and my job was to sound as good as I can and to be a part of this rhythm section that I thought was amazing, and to support Art Neville, who I thought was like a wonderful singer, a wonderful underrated singer,
yes.
that just didn't ever get to do that he was doing. I lowballed my participation in that scene, throughout the 60s and throughout the 70s, the late 60s and 70s. I didn't start thinking about what my contributions meant to the music world or the industry until much later, until the young players of the 20th century started, saying, man, that's get George Porter to come in and do something,
It's interesting to see how you crossed over in the sense of like artists like David Byrne, who's decidedly, a newer generation. Tori Amos, you did work with her. Of course, you did stuff with Willie DeVille. Of course, the great Robert Palmer. So you all of a sudden you became an in-demand session player.
It got hairy, and that's what was kind of the thing that was instrumental. Part of the instrumental part of me getting sober is that phone didn't ring as much, because, people, I had people tell me that they say, man, I'd love to call you, man. I just don't know which one of you going to show up. Mm-hmm. And that was that, and for a while, I didn't matter to me. It's like, I had mailbox money, so I didn't care. You know what I'm saying? It was like, okay, bro, no problem, And then when I thought I actually blew it with my family, I thought I lost my wife and child, because of just not being on time for them to go to church on that Sunday morning. That's when, for me, my mental body physically broke down when my wife came back from dropping my daughter off at church. She found me all balled up in a knot on the sofa in the living room, crying my heart out, and got my mom on the phone. And my mom said, my mom just asked me, "Are you ready to go and get fixed?" And I said, "Yes." And so she picked me up. I didn't know she had been playing, and she had made the plan to get me in the Bowling Green months before I actually got there. So whenever I decided I was going to go, that bed was there for me, and that's what I did. That was almost 31 years ago.
So she knew you were ready to go before you did.
Yeah, she knew I would be ready.
Yeah. But that's nice too, that she had the faith that at a low point as it was, but she had the faith to know that at some point you go, hey, I got to stop this.
Yeah.
So that's very cool though. When you look at it that way.
Yeah.
And of course now we're talking, here we are in the 21st century with YouTube, and you're able to appreciate your legacy. I think one of the most popular video genres on YouTube is how to play the wrist in Cissy Strut. I don't know if you
Well, actually, it's how to play it wrong, because most everybody plays it wrong.
Yeah, that was funny. It caught me on a bad day. I just said, wait, I gotta stop this.
Well, it's funny because before I got on with you today, wanted to take a look at the Oz Noy version where he displaces the beat. And so he's doing this expose on, well, it's still in 4/4, and then you listen to it and you go, no, it doesn't work.
Well, Leo Nocentelli has a 5/4 version of Cissy Strut, which is like, I can't listen to it.
Yeah. Well, have you ever heard Todd Rundgren does a Cool Jerk in 7?
Oh, no kidding. No, I haven't heard that.
Can you do it? Can you do it? Can you do it? Can you do it? Can you?
Oh, my God.
Yeah, but again, it's cheating. In my day, you had to scratch the record and keep playing it over and over again. You couldn't put it on a loop where you couldn't watch anybody on a video or slow it down.
Right. Yeah, you're right.
I'm sure there are a lot more wrong versions, but it's it's such a great tune that it sounds good even when you play it wrong.
Yeah, well, it was like I kind of remember when we did that 2000 reunion
Right.
And at the Fillmore was the other theater in San Francisco.
The Warfield.
The Warfield.
Yeah.
And we got to the rehearsal. We was there for a couple of days. We had like 2 days rehearsal or something like that. Naturally, Cissy Strut came up on the set list and we started playing it. And I started playing it and Leo stopped the band. He said, Porter, what the hell you doing? I said, what's wrong, man? He said, that's not the lick. It was unbelievable that I had been playing it wrong 15 years. It was like, because I played it with the jazz band, David Lasty and his band, and a lot of some of the other jazz musicians around the city. Because when I was home for all that period of time when we weren't playing together, I was playing with everybody, street musicians and stuff, and most of those young guys learned Cissy Strut from the big band version that was the Navy band. I can't never remember if it was Grady Gaines or one of those drummers that had the big band, the big Navy band. He had wrote Cissy Strut out, and the horn players was playing the heads, and they played it with they had those extra two notes, and so everybody learned Cissy Strut not from the meters but from that. Okay. All the jazz players learned it from there. And that was Cissy Strut. And that went on there. And so eventually I learned it like that, the way they were playing it. And I never argued with nobody about notes. I didn't pick. But playing with Leo Nocentelli, you got to play the right notes.
Wow. We should do an instructional video on how not to play it and then on how to play it.
Well, if George can take liberties with it, then anybody can, really. I mean,
well, I do now. Now today, my Porter Trio band, and running partners both. I played in both bands. Plays Cissy Strut. It's a 12-bar blues now, and it's called Cissy Got the Blues. You figure after 50 years. Cissy got a blues. I mean, she got a right to be bluesy. And
tired of strutting, I guess.
Tired of strutting. So like I played the second lick on a 1 and a 4 chord, and the first lick on a 5 and a 4 chord.
That's very cool. No, but we should do a video. Just okay, this is how it's done. Yeah. For all you folks out there who think you're playing it properly, really how it's done.
And what is your reaction when you see all the stuff online on YouTube, tributing the meters and referencing them all the time? Gosh, 50 years after you made those records.
Well, I mean, I'm very honored and humbled by the fact that that some of the music, and there's another thing that was what I like about what I'm hearing is that a lot of times it's not those traditional songs that that the band always kind of leaned on. Whenever the band got the opportunity to play together, we would always lean at that same 15 to 17 songs, and it would always be dictated to me as that's what the fans want. And I would say, no, bro. The fans want to hear you play, but you really would be excited if you can if the meters was to take and say, we're going to do 6 shows, and each one of those shows, or maybe just 3 shows, and we'll do the 2 albums on each show, note for note, in the order they were done. And I say, we'll sell out 6 shows right off the top of the bat, but nobody gonna come and think they're gonna see the same show they saw yesterday. They won't bite.
Well, that's a popular format with artists doing their albums in their entirety, and then you also have to take one of the great advantages of digital distribution is now at my fingertips. I have everything you ever recorded. So right. there is a desire to hear that stuff live.
Right. And some of it is free.
Oh yeah. Well, unfortunately, I mean, I guess for you guys, obviously streaming does not revenues record royalties did, but then artists got ripped off when there was records anyway. So
right, exactly. I mean, it was almost 30 years before I made any money off of royalties off of the recordings that we did for those record labels. Mostly because the manager, our then manager, although the record labels had forgiven those advances, against the recordings of those projects, that manager kept charging us for those things. Kept saying that, he was getting paid twice,
Right. Yeah.
But it wasn't until we actually got, I think at that time it was Bug Music, bought our catalog. Probably 6, 7 months later, started seeing royalty checks and say, "Whoa, what is this for?" I remember calling David Hirschman and said, "Man, what is this? Why are we getting a royalty check? I thought we still owed Warner Brothers big money. And he said, "No, man, Warner Brothers forgave that stuff back in '78." He said, "Yeah, man, your guy, and I'm not gonna call his name, but he was just taking us for all that money. He was just taking us for all our income."
You think nowadays? I mean, obviously, I like to say it's the best of times, it's the worst of time. Now, as an artist, you really have control over your music. You can distribute it directly to your fans, and of course your merch. And it seems like the music industry is headed back to just you have to deliver live, you have to put on a show, and you have that's where you're going to make your money.
Absolutely, I believe that. I believe that the performance is still the best way to earn income, as well as people want to people really want to hear you play this stuff, Right. I mean, that's the reason why the Can't Beat the Funk was recorded, because people were asking for those songs and nobody was playing them, Right. So after Running Partners put out that record, I started hearing other bands playing some of those songs. And even after I put that record out, it was still very hard for me to get any of the meter inclinations to play those songs. I mean, it was like, "Oh, well, man, the song don't go nowhere," Sorry, sir, but the song is 53 years old and is still being asked for. The song has come a long ways, But that's just the way the minds of some of us, have outgrown. Some of us has outgrown the music that we played when we were kids. I kind of think that I've not outgrown it. I've grown, but I still lean back and reach for some of that stuff. Reach for some of the simplicity of that original music.
You certainly embellish it on Can't Beat the Funk. I mean, it's a 21st century version of those songs.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, David, shall we talk about some of the tracks we want to play?
Yes, indeed. We have a nice listing of tunes.
It's hard to pick track.
Well, we were talking about Cissy Strut. We'll play that, but we could also play some of the wrong versions too. Like John Schofield, not to mention names. Just as a thought. See, it's internet radio. I can get away with being myself. One tune that, Tom, you didn't pick that I think we should play, People Say.
That fits the timing that we are in today.
We're going to do a David Byrne song. We're going to do a Tori Amos tune. What was it like working with David Byrne? I just find that to be an interesting combination.
I was very timid about that session, because I just thought that they had, probably 40 or 50 bass players in New York City that could play that idea, without thinking about it, that I had to think about to play this stuff. The producer of the record, because we had done a couple of tracks. I think the band was on a break, and I just kind of walked up to the producer guy and said, "Man, are y'all getting what y'all want from me, on this music, man?" Because, I told him exactly. I said, "I think y'all probably can find 30, 40 guys up here that could do this, And the producer guy told me, said, "Oh, no, Mr. Porter, it's like that is what you do in New Orleans is what David wanted." And he says, "And we're getting exactly what we need from you, so don't worry about it."
Robert Palmer, one of my favorite records from the Sneak and Sally record, Sail and Choose. That's interesting that a British pop singer would choose the meters to back him up on a record.
Yeah. And he came in, and I'm not sure exactly how that go because, Alan wasn't in the studio with us when we did that record. And as I kind of remember, not only did the Meters not get credit on the record when it came out, but Alan didn't get producers credits either. I'm thinking that Robert actually came in to New Orleans, expressed reasons to be recording with the Meters and not, get produced by Alan through the meter. The Meters getting Meters through Alan Toussaint, because he came down a second time after he had put out that first record, and he came in and he, we basically sat on our hands and said, so what you want us to play? Because, basically the Meters wrote that Robert Palmer record, the tracks that we recorded, everybody, we basically, it was our bass lines, our guitar riffs, all he gave us was the chord changes.
I see. Yeah, which was right. That's in a lot of rock situations. That's how it is. You deserve writing credits. You deserve production credits on those records.
Well, we definitely deserve we're not necessarily writers, but we definitely deserve just credits saying that they were the band. We didn't get that either. I worked working with Tori. She had a unique way of recording, and when we did that third album. I had been mentioning to her, that she should bring, me and the drummer in to the track with her, just so we can play off of each other. And so what we play influences how she approaches things. Previous two records, we were brought in after she had already laid her tracks totally down.
She just overdubbed, yeah.
And we just basically overdubbed to, click tracks. And so on the parts of some of the songs, her tempos went up and down, because that's the way she felt them. She felt them that way. Yeah. And so we would click track to this section of the song, and then they'll stop us, and then they'll give us the new section, and we'll click track to that one, And I said, those work. When you listen to it all down, it all sound, how you say, it sound humanly going all the way through. It was not, it sounded to me, I guess that's all because I knew it, but it sounded, like this was all punched in,
Right, of course, yeah.
But when we did the third record, and I think one of those things we did, things on the third record, till the chicken, I think something about the chicken comes in,
right, yeah.
Yeah, and we recorded that with an acoustic bass sitting on the steps, and she was sitting by the piano. She played the piano. It was just the two of us. I think it was Kashi, drummer. Can't think of his name. But he's like one of those. Manu Cache. Yeah.
Great drummer.
He came in and replaced all of the drum parts to the drums that was there. Before, because the guy who started the session, ended up talking his way out of the session.
Well, it's funny though, because Tommy was saying about, and I'm glad you brought it up about the Robert Palmer record, because in its own way, Joe Cocker album Stingray was done by Stuff. And Don't you find it kind of interesting that both of those were done right around the same time?
Now, David, we talked to George. We talked to Carmine Rojas a few weeks ago, and Carmine used your bass on a Patti LaBelle record. We were talking. Now, I guess we can now come to the conclusion that Carmine copied George's bass, because didn't Carmine take a Telecaster neck and put it on a Fender Jazz bass? You guys both played on a Patti LaBelle record. I think the track.
No, actually, it was a LaBelle record.
Oh, it was a LaBelle record. Okay,
it was a full band.
Yeah. Well, I did the first record, the Lady Marmalade, and then I think Leo Nelson, Telly, and myself played with the LA sessions on the San Francisco sessions with David Rubinson produced the second record. I don't know so Carmen, which record did he play on?
A Phoenix record
in New Orleans, though. So that was down in your hometown. I'm not quite sure which one.
So then there may have been some sex parts of that record. I don't know. I don't remember if we played the whole. I think we played majority of that record. I don't believe that we didn't play all of the record. And then again, being at age. Then we were in the age of replacing people. So, my parts could have easily been removed.
Okay. Well, it's interesting, too, because Carmine was saying that Alan had mentioned to him to play less. And he said it was a very instructive play less, not just, hey, kid, play less,
Yeah.
I think that record where he used your bass was Pressure Cooking. I see Carmine on there. I don't see your credits on there. And then I think there was Nightbirds was another one that you guys had played on. Let's see. Yep, there's George Porter on that record, Nightbirds. I think there was one more. Phoenix was the one.
Phoenix was the second one, I think.
Yeah,
that
okay.
was in it then, because it was the second record from what I
All
remember.
right, so that's the one where Carmen used George's bass on that, okay? Because I see George on a couple of tracks and I see Carmen on a couple of tracks.
Okay.
All right. That session was done in California.
Okay, all right. Investigative reporters, we have to get to the bottom of that. Yes, so I guess they ordered Carmen to play more like George than on those tracks. To play like
Exactly.
Yeah.
George, I think Carmen was in his Chuck Rainey fixation there. And, dial it back, play it like George.
You know which one song, we picked one song, or actually Tom picked this tune. It's a great tune you did on a Robbie Robertson record called Back to the Woods.
Go Back to Your Woods. Yeah, that was a good record. Yeah, I like that song.
And we're going to do It Do Me Good by Willie DeVille.
Wow, cool.
Anything else?
Great track with Alan, Last Train.
Oh, nice. I had, that record. I don't think I ever heard that whole record. I need to go buy that record. What's the name of that record? Was that the Night? Was it Night People?
Was that?
Last Train is on the album called Southern Nights.
Southern Nights. Okay.
That's the one, 75, and recorded in New Orleans. Yeah, sure.
Did we get credits on that?
Well, you got credits on Wikipedia.
You know what? You just
see, Robert Palmer came to New Orleans and screwed everything up, right? We don't have to put their names on the records anymore.
You know what you made me think about when you said Southern Cross or Southern Nights? Wasn't there a Crusaders record, Southern Cross?
Yes, there was, I believe. Yeah.
And they too, not unlike Stuff and the Meters. It was kind of like this. There was a lot of funk going on back then. Good stuff.
Yeah. I think his name was Robert Popwell, I believe.
Popwell.
In fact, the night that we played, I forgot the names. Open for us, Popwell was at the gig that night, and he came back in the back and he was just talking with Zig and Leo. And when I came into the room, he just turned around and I didn't know who the hell he was. And he said, "Oh, this is the guy I want to see." Big hug and stuff. But he always would tell me, say, "Man, the Crusaders was listening to you guys, man."
Oh yeah, sure.
There's no doubt about that.
Since the beginning, man.
When you look back over your career, George, what are the records you're most proud of?
Are the Meter records?
Any of them, any session work, anyone that
I think those first three records, there are songs in those first three records that I'm very proud of. As far as even though we, as I said, as the career got longer, the next record always, for me as a bass player, got simpler. My parts got better. By the time we got to the records where it was called the singing parts of the band, they had abandoning, the things that put us on the map. By that time, at the same time, we had a wonderful vocalist named Art Neville that wasn't getting used. And it was like, man, I understood, but I didn't particularly totally agreed that we should abandon, what we had created, what we had thing, I think my biggest pride record would probably be the Rejuvenation record. That was, Rejuvenation would probably be the proudest. I mean, I think that was like a piece of a work of art. Leo and Zig worked really hard because that was like the first and only record that we as a band, well, not we as a band, but Leo and Zig as members of the band stayed with the record until it was mastered. And one of the things was that, the band had gotten to that point with management that, hey, no. You're not shipping us out as soon as we finish these sessions, because that's the way the old days would work. We'd cut the sounds and then they'd put us on the road for 4 months, and somebody, A&R guys show up on the road and hand us a record. Hey, this your new record, Hey, what these names are? I mean, most of those tracks we didn't even name, It was like, we had to actually learn the name of songs, because not only learn the music, but we had to learn the name.
So that's how the record industry ran in those days.
Yeah, yeah.
It was a fly-by-night industry. It's not. It wasn't the industry it became in the 80s and the 90s, and now, sadly, the record industry is no more. When you look back over the thousands of performances, are there any that particularly stand out to you?
I want to say probably that 2000 reunion.
Okay.
For the meters, performance-wise, stands out with me. And it's mostly because, it was like after not playing together for almost 20 years, it was like, wow, it's like this stuff is still magical, it's still magical, It was short-lived, but it was magical. Then the next time we did the reunion for after the Katrina hit,
right,
for the New Orleans Jazz and Heritage Festival. Once again, they had that spark that Everett Quint Davis, the coordinator for the Jazz Festival, he was ready to invest some money in putting the band, out there and doing some other shows and stuff like that. We couldn't get out of the dressing rooms fast enough. It was like, okay, bye, see you. Go back to California now.
I'm really grateful that you took the time to do this.
Yeah, George, it's great to
really a
meet you
pleasure.
virtually.
Really a pleasure.
And hopefully we can catch you live when this doggone plague is over.
Yeah, I hear you. Oops. That's my telephone. Somebody must be trying to get us off the phone.
All right.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, gentlemen. It's a pleasure meeting you all.
We'll see you again.
All right. Bye-bye.
This is David Gross for the Bass Guitar Channel radio show on cigdisradio.com. So that's it for tonight, folks. Thanks so much for listening. I want to thank Tom Semioli of KnowYourBassPlayer.com. And of course, I want to thank George Porter for an incredible interview. Next week, we've got something special for you. So you're just going to have to tune in and we'll let you know. Take care.